Well, hello, everybody. Tara Bachland here with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism with another great guest here in the Becoming an Herbalist series. And so many delightful surprises, so many pathways to become an herbalist, which I'm so sure you'll be excited to hear this new story as well as I am. So this is my guest today is Michele Rigling. She is an ecotherapist and counselor in the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. And for the last several years also has been creating wonderful experiences as the director of the Wild Medicine Conference and also, I believe, originating, correct, with this Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so excited to be here.
So as you shared a little bit about you in an email, and then I got into your website and stuff, and there's just so much more. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun exploring how you incorporated your profession and herbalism. So I'm excited to dive in. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with the conferences because it's, that kind of has a bigger picture, and then like get into how did you get there, and then what else do you do? So you've added a new conference this year, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The Wild Medicine Conference.
And then you've been doing the other conference, the Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference, for how many years?
This is our sixth year this year.
So I put on a few events, and it is a lot of work. But what I've seen on your website as well, because you're also a counselor at a doctorate level, and you incorporate herbs into your practice, it sounds like, which we'll get into that as well. How did you get into organizing events?
Well, earlier in my career, I just always fell into all the event planning roles at companies that I had. And so if there was a wellness fair, somehow I was the one planning it. If there was a fundraiser, I was somehow the one planning it. And I am a planner at heart. I love to plan just about anything. And so, I've planned a 9-day vintage car rally across the United States, and I've planned herbal conferences. So there's a lot of things that fall in between those two. And so I think it was just over a period of time, it's just naturally what happened. And I was really fortunate to be able to land in a place where I can do what I love and plan the events that have to do with what I love versus planning other people's events.
Yep. So the car rally wasn't your event? Is that what
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
It was exciting, though.
It was very exciting. Yeah.
So what are some key components that you like to integrate into your events? What makes your events unique?
The event that inspired me to start the Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference was my attendance at the Southeast Wise Women Conference. And I went to that conference, and I remember for the first time feeling like in a very public space, I was safe to literally just take my shoes off. And there was just such a freedom that weekend to explore all these different, nature-based healing topics, and also just be myself. There was no corporate, agenda or anything like that was surrounding me. And I just got to be free, so to speak. And so I came back from the first year that I went to that conference thinking that, I looked around and there was a regional women's herbal conference almost everywhere except in the Mid-South. And so for a couple of years, I actually said many times, someone needs to plan the Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference. Like, our region needs a women's herbal conference. And I was already working with herbs a little bit at that time, and was definitely already into like transpersonal work and nature-based healing, but I had not envisioned myself as a conference director at that point. And one day I was just, again, sitting there telling somebody needs to do this. And it just hit me. Oh, I'm the somebody. Got it. Okay. This is what we're doing now. And so that's kind of how that started, was just, I really felt that event had a really profound effect on me. Just seeing so many people come together in a supportive space to talk about folk medicine and natural healing and herbs. And I just not experienced like anything like that anywhere else.
Neat. So I'm from the Midwest, and the Midwest is also a large area. So specifically, I'm from Minnesota, so the upper Midwest. So for those of us who don't know the South like the back of our hand, what is the Mid-South area?
So the Mid-South is Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, Arkansas, Missouri can kind of fit in there too if you want, but we're really talking about like that Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia area.
And so what makes a regional herbal event, what makes them different from each other? Is it focusing on the herbs in that area, or the culture, or all the above?
Yeah, I think that over the years, the answer to that question probably has shifted. We have a very specific vision and mission at the Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference to be a platform for Mid-South herbalists. And so we do have, we do bring maybe a keynote speaker in from other places, or we'll have one or two presenters from somewhere else. But we really want to create a community that can still gather throughout the year and hopefully in person at times. And so we have people attend from all over the country, and we love that. But our focus is really to give our regional herbalists and regional students a space to, collaborate and learn together and celebrate together and all of that. So I think that some regional herbal conferences have more of a national focus, or they're not specific to the region. The plants they're talking about, the herbalists may not be from the region, and some are. So I think depending on which regional herbal conference you ask that question, you'd probably get a different answer. But that's kind of our approach, is that we really are focusing on the herbalists and the practitioners and the healers in the Mid-South. And then we're inviting people from all over the country, all over the world, to come and learn about, Appalachian folk medicine and Southern traditions and the plants that grow here and that sort of thing.
That's neat. So obviously Matthew Wood is the guest from outside of the South this time around.
Yeah, so the Wild Medicine Conference is a little different. So the Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference, like I said, it's been 6 years so far. And this past year, shout out to Phyllis Light, because Phyllis Light and I were having a conversation about how we would really like to see a co-ed conference in the Mid-South that kind of has the flair to it that Wild Medicine has. And so through a collaborative conversation between the two of us, Wild Medicine Conference was born. And so this year will be the very first ever Wild Medicine Conference. And the mission with Wild Medicine is a little different than the Mid-South Women's Herbal, in that I really want to be able to bring people from other areas to the Mid-South, because a lot of times we're having to travel really far distances to see like somebody like Matthew or David Winston in person. And so bringing them to the Mid-South helps herbalists and students and the community of the Mid-South have access to learning from them in person, when sometimes that would be a really, it'd be challenging. Plane tickets, lots of time off work, that sort of things. And so Wild Medicine has kind of a different focus.
It sounds like fun. Like you said, even when you just hear herbal conference, it sounds like it is a place that you can kick your shoes off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
whether it's to relax or just like dance out in the dirt or something.
Yep. It's always one of my favorite moments at a conference when, as the director, I'm in and out of all these different spaces, doing all these different things. And there'll be a moment, usually the first day after, I don't know, maybe 5 hours, where the shoes start coming off. And I remember that moment for me at that first conference I went to, and I was like, okay, we're there. This is going to be good. Yeah. Everything's downhill from here. We're good.
They're settling in.
Yeah.
So this is a 3-day conference, so that's plenty of barefoot time.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, people can arrange accommodations. There's a few more, there's 20 spots left. So it's really, there's only a few spots left.
Yeah, Wild Medicine, we have a few commuter passes left. We have a few on-site lodging options left. We do have less than 20 spots left. So yeah, it's going to be great. Central Alabama, it's a beautiful camp. And lots of trees and acreage to roam around on and play on in between classes and in the evenings. And yeah, three whole days.
Yeah, that's plenty of time to settle in and explore. Mm-hmm. What is it that you're particularly looking forward to?
I'm really excited. I'm really excited to be with David and Matthew in person as well. And so that's an exciting part on a personal note. But I'm also really happy to be broadening some of my work to I'm all adults because most of my work has been with women only. And I consider that kind of a niche and a specialty of whether it's women's health or women's spirituality. That's kind of a specialty of mine and a passion of mine. But I've heard for so many years, so I've had so many requests to just do a few things for everybody because my brother wants to come or my husband wants to come or my partner wants to come and I can't bring them. And so I'm really happy that this feels right because I could have done that at any time, but it's really important to me to really tune in to the right timing for things, not only for maybe the community, but for me. And I feel like it's the right time. And so that feels really good. So I'm excited to see it come to life and just see everybody together and learning together. And I think it's going to be great.
Well, you've put a nice discount together for the people who are watching who can grab the last 20 spots. I mean, you could easily just say, hey, we only have 20 spots left, but you are offering a nice discount. I believe it's $50 off for whatever's left because there are some that have sold out. And I think the discount is just WILD, WILD, correct?
That's correct.
Is that case sensitive?
It is, all caps.
Okay. There you go. So grab your tickets. It is the domain, by the way, again, is wildmedicineconference.com. And you can grab your tickets still. There's a variety of accommodations. So check out what's available. So there's so much more to you. And it's so interesting. It seems like you've hosted other retreats as well as a part of your therapy practice as well. So I'm really excited to get to learn more about this because this is especially fascinating. I'm glad we have this to talk about as well. So I'm going to just briefly read the description you have on your site, and I might as well share this because it's really captivating as well. So Michele is a doctorate-level transpersonal counselor, certified ecotherapy guide, and trauma-informed sacred plant medicine facilitator. She's a board-certified holistic health practitioner who offers counseling and events that integrate nature, deep psychology, and soul-centered practices. Her goal is to empower others as they reclaim their own reconnect with self and spirit, and navigate life's challenges in authentic ways. She holds space for hard questions, holistic recovery, spiritual questing, and whole self healing. And your site, you go by the Cavewoman Way. So many questions here, but maybe what comes to mind to you first? Like, how did you become this Cavewoman Way woman?
Well, you might have to reel me in. I'm a wordy person, so if I get way off on a tangent, you just pull me back.
My podcasts are great for tangents.
I have to take it all the way back to childhood for just a second and say that I had a pretty whimsical, mystical childhood. I grew up on 40 acres in rural Tennessee, and my mom was a very imaginative, creative person, and we spent a lot of time in the woods talking to trees and letting them talk back and talking about fairies and, just a lot of magic and enchantment. That was normal for me. And when I became an adult, I was really fascinated, even in high school, with psychology. And so I decided that was the career that I wanted to pursue. I wanted to go into psychology, become a social worker or a counselor. And that was kind of what I wanted to do. And so I got my bachelor's degree in psychology and started doing some social work. And it took me a little while to realize what was going on, but I kept feeling like there was a disconnect. Like in all of the interventions that I learned about and the methodologies that we were working with, there was this missing component. And it took me several years to realize that nature was the missing component. And so when I figured that out, it was a big aha moment. And it was like, okay, I cannot continue on this laid out conventional psychology, social work path. I'm going to have to make my own way. And so at that point, I really started taking any opportunity I could to learn any sort of nature-based healing practices. I took certain trainings and certification programs and all these different kind of things to start piecing together and figuring out, like, how do I blend all this together? And so that's what happened. I mean, I could go down a zigzag trail of all of those little tangents, but, whether it was drum circles and rhythm, and thinking about the mycelium network and how all of that can play together, or it was, wilderness quests and working with teenagers at in summer camps, connecting to nature, some of them maybe being out in the woods for the very first time in their lives. There was just all of these different things that started happening over the course of about 8 years that kind of put me on the trajectory of where I am now. And then I also think that there was a much grander plan in place than the one I had, because a lot of very mysterious synchronistic things happened over the course of those 8 years that there's just no way, first of all, that I could have planned it. And second of all, the opportunities, some of them would have cost me for a fortune, and they just would land. I'm thinking about like a trauma-informed sacred plant medicine training that I went through, that it was gifted, just very randomly gifted to me. I didn't apply for it. I didn't ask for it. It was gifted. And so it just seems like when I look back, it seems like the universe kind of had these markers already in place, and I was just following the breadcrumbs. Mm-hmm. So I'm always excited to see what the next breadcrumb is going to be, because some of them have been quite unexpected and interesting as I've discovered them for myself. So I'm always interested to see what's going to be around the next corner.
That's so interesting that you bring that up. One of the things that I'm trying to do in the series of becoming an herbalist is to see what are the commonalities in people who have, quote, found their way, right? I believe a lot of people we're always finding our way. We're always on the path in some form or fashion. But for those who've, quote, found their way in combining herbalism with what they love to do, and making a profession, is what are the commonalities? And that's certainly one of them, is just like being in motion and following your interests, your loves, those inklings, and not overthinking it a lot of the times. Would you say does that summarize what you were going through?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I have definitely fallen into some pretty deep traps of overthinking, and that's when I get off the path. That's the fastest way to get off the path.
How do you notice that you're thinking too much, or is it mostly in hindsight? Or how might someone, if maybe we share those characteristics, how does that show up for you?
I think one of the biggest things I notice is that I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. It may look the same on the outside to somebody. Like, it may not look, I don't know, off brand, so to speak, or it may not look random to somebody else. But for me, there's a disconnect. I feel like I'm having to force myself to follow through on something, or it's not flowing through me. I think that flow state's another really key component for me. If I'm having to like dig out notes and like really get into like past training and all the heady stuff, I'm probably not where I need to be, because when I'm where I need to be and I'm on the path, I don't have to reach for those things. They just flow. I just have access to them. And so, yeah, when I'm overthinking and over planning, it's a lot of work. And when I'm on the path and I'm aligned, it's not a lot of work. It may take up a lot of time, but it's not a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I think we've all had the experience of that flow state, and just to be reminded of it, just to have that little reminder. So so the Cavewoman Way, so you do, have you always done retreats as well, or why the Cavewoman Way?
Yeah. So when I was still working in the social work field full time, I started leading women's circles and small retreats as a community offering. And when COVID happened, I had already built the website to the Cavewoman Way. I'd already picked out the name. I'd already gotten the LLC, but I was just terrified to leave my stable employment and take the leap. And I'd come to a place where I could not do both. I could not grow the women's circles and the retreat work that I was doing and stay employed full time. Like, it just wasn't sustainable. I was tapped. And so I knew that I had to leave full-time stable employment, but I was very scared to do it. And during COVID, the company that I worked for lost over $1 million in funding, and my position was cut. And they told me that we would love for you to stay on. what we can offer you is kind of a collage of tasks for a significant less amount of money. And that wasn't very interesting to me, you know? And so when so many people were losing their jobs, a lot of people were actually surprised that I didn't take that, because there was a lot of fear, but it actually made the choice really easy. I just said, thank you for making this choice easy. And I left, and I felt like I had no choice but to look at that as the kick from the universe. Like, do it. The website is you like literally all you have to do is hit the launch button. Like, it's meticulously created, and you know, everything was ready, and I was just holding back. And so that's how it ended up going live, so to speak. But the name actually came to me in a meditation. And from a depth psychology standpoint, I've always been really interested in the inner journey. And you can call that a lot of different things, you know, whether you want to say pilgrimage or quest or heroine's journey or whatever you want to say. This journey of separating from the outside world for a little while, going into a really deep space that's typically a mystical experience of some kind, and, you know, shedding some things, hearing some things, sitting in some things, and then bringing back a little bit more of yourself than you went in with. And we can do that as an external journey, like in a nature quest or a vision fast, or, you know, there's altered states of consciousness and things like that. But that can also be a very inner journey. And so for me, the myth of the cave journey, and it's not just a myth and a metaphor. I mean, it's a real thing. People have throughout history gone into caves and approached the cave as an oracle, or sat in darkness for days or even weeks at a time, you know, looking for something, a sign, a vision, an answer, to remember something vital to take back to their life and their community. And so I've always been fascinated by all of that and weaved a lot of that into my work. But I was in a meditation one day, and the Cavewoman Way just came. And I remember thinking, I don't think I'm anywhere near ready to sign up to be the cave woman. Like, to me, that means a lot. And this was 5 years ago, maybe. And I was like, I just don't think I'm ready to take that on. And whoever was speaking to me said, don't worry, you'll grow into it.
Yeah.
And neat. So I was like, okay, here we go.
Neat. Well, I've heard also the cave, you know, resembling or symbolizing the womb.
Absolutely.
So that you're a position for rebirth as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah. So I would love to hear about, you've mentioned drumming. What are some of the other modalities that you love to use?
One of my favorite things is a medicine walk. And a medicine walk is like an abbreviated nature quest. And so it's where you take a day and you go out into nature, and you just, you know, you don't take your phone with you. You may not even take a journal with you. And if you're familiar with plant spirit medicine, as in connecting with the spirit or essence of a plant, it's a similar experience where you go out in nature and you see what talks to you, and you give yourself to nature for a full day. And a lot of traditions, you know, like a vision fast or a quest may last 3 days, or it may last 9 days. But what I've found is that is a really tall order in our culture, and that a lot of people just can't access that. I mean, there's not enough time off or whatever. There's a lot of different things that contribute to that. But a 1-day medicine walk is, things happen. You know, you still have a really profound experience and come back with some treasure. And it's a great practice to not only help regulate the nervous system and help us in that 1 day kind of see how dysregulated we might be in our daily life all the time, but it's became our norm. And so we don't realize that we're under that much stress and anxiety and pressure all the time. And so just that 1 day immersed in nature can be kind of a wake-up call in some regard. But it also lets us dip our toe into those mystical experiences with nature. Because if we're quiet and we're still and we're listening, then nature speaks. And it may come in a very unexpected way. It may not be a voice, it may be a sense, or it may be something that just passes through your mind. It may not be from a tree or a plant, it may be from a rock, or a raven, but things happen. And it's such an experience. I always have things to integrate, whether I'm the one on the walk or not. Sometimes when I'm facilitating the walks and what people bring back, there's so much in that for me as much as the people that went on the walk. And so that's a practice that I love to integrate into some of my experiences and retreats. Drumming is a favorite of everybody's. And, you brought up the womb space and kind of, like femininity. And one of the things about the drum is that there's so much her story around the drum. In so many ancient cultures, women were drummers. And so I really feel like there's a reclamation that happens when women get drums in their hands. And I love to see that when it happens. And so there's so much about the drum bringing us back into our body and letting us feel rhythm and energy in our body when we live in our mind so often. And so, and then there's the community element of drumming where we're all in harmony with each other or not harmony with each other. And then we're in laughter with each other. And, it's fun, but it's quite healing. And there's a lot of science to support, what drumming does in the body and the brain. But I find it a very spiritual experience. And I facilitated a drum circle recently in a corporate environment, so I had to check some of my transpersonal stuff at the door for that experience. But something really, really cool happened because we were all drumming, and somebody kind of interrupted the drum circle, and they said, "Did y'all hear that?" And we were like, "Well, hear what?" And he says, "Well, it sounded like chanting." He was like, "Was somebody singing quietly?" And nobody was singing quietly. And he was like, "No, I heard chanting." And I was like, "Oh, I did not check it at the door. It came right on in." I just, like we tapped into that mystical realm through the rhythm. And someone else in the same circle was like, "Yeah, I was closing my eyes for a little while and I saw a forest and like all these things were happening in the forest. And I wasn't going to say anything because it seems really weird. But since he said that thing about chanting, I'm going to," and it was just the coolest. And I just let it all happen. I didn't take anybody anywhere with the conversation. I just left it. And I just thought, yeah, sometimes you don't have to explain that. You don't have to say, "We're going to journey with the drum." The drum will just take people there. And that was a really cool experience.
That's really neat. And that the person could feel that they could bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
Right, to mention it. That's so cool. So just before we started, I went out. The last 2 days in Minnesota here have been beautiful. So it's April, still early-ish April, but we had 60-some degree weather yesterday. It's going to be in the upper 60s today. And we have little green things popping up, which is so fun to see. And so I went on a long walk yesterday, and I was walking by these pine trees, and I just heard them like, it was windy yesterday. And I thought to myself, "Oh, neat. I could do a video for that on the doctrine of signatures." I'm like, "How would I do that?" And then I thought to myself, "No, you just got called. You're just supposed to like be with it." It felt like it seemed like the tree was calling, like getting my attention, like listen, or you can't help but notice. And it was so cool. I mean, we know that it's the wind passing through the tree, but it just has something, like you've mentioned, transpersonal. It seems otherworldly. It seems like it's more. And then before we got on here, I just walked around the garden. Again, just little tiny green things are popping up. And it's that similar feeling. I don't have my phone, which is delightful. I don't feel like I need to take a picture, but just to be present. And these little buds are showing up on the dogwoods. And they're just like, "Hey." I mean, just the way they look, it looks like they're saying, "Hey, good to see you." It's just, those little moments I think are just necessary.
Yeah, I think too, if you incorporate if you incorporate herbs or nature or anything like that into your business, I think that for me, that has been one of the biggest challenges, is to take those moments that are meant for you. Because in our culture, it's just so tempting to video it. to post it, to turn it into a blog post, to turn it into something. And I feel like when we do that, we really leave the moment. And now we're in the block. Now we're in the future moment where we're going to post that. And I think it's so dismissive to the tree that's trying to talk to us to be like, I know what I'm going to do with this, instead of, oh, you want to talk to me? Like, let me be here with you and hear what you might have to say, or let us just rest together or be together. Maybe there's not anything even to say. But I think there's a pressure in our culture to always make something into something. And that's been something that I've struggled with. And I just consistently have to remind myself, like, no, this is for you. This is just for this moment. Nothing else needs to happen. No one else even needs to know about it. Just be here now.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think of also when a cat that I used to have, when I would get home, she'd be like, meow, 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 like, hi, pet me, and I missed you. And I'd be like, I have groceries, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And sometimes she'd like start getting upset. And then it took me a while, but I figured, I've got to slow down. She's trying to be with me, and how sweet, what does it take to, take 5 minutes and be present with her? And to me, it has that similar feel like with the plants. I mean, the plants, they can grab you, some of them can, but it's easier to just walk on by. And I literally did that with the pine tree. I started walking past, and then I was like, no, it's still like, I got to go. I just like kind of trotted back to it. I was like, no, I just had to kind of appreciate a little bit more. Oh, that was a lovely tangent. Oh, it's so fun to see the green stuff coming up again. I was at the dentist the other day, and I go to a biologic dentist, and we're just commenting about, lifting up the leaves, and you see the little green things coming up. And I said, I wonder, so we live in the north where we have a long period of time without seeing green stuff. And I said, I wonder if you live somewhere where it's like constantly green, or there's always something flowering, or that they have their seasons, but we go such a long time without it. I mean, when the spring comes around, you're just like, oh, it's so exciting. It's so renewing and refreshing. And I said, I wonder how you get that in a place that's constantly green. Where else do you get that? I still don't know, but maybe someone can share in the chat how they get that.
Yeah, I remember I lived in New Orleans for a couple of years. And when I lived there, one of the first questions I asked when I moved was, I was asking people about fall. And I said, do you have fall here? And they're like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, well, do the leaves change colors in the fall? And the couple of people I asked said, well, I'm not sure. And I said, well, then they don't. It's not something you miss. And that was the way it was there. Like it was a very exciting 2 years that I lived there, but I desperately missed the changing of the seasons. Because it was just kind of the same all year long in regards to the blooming and the greenery. So
Yeah. Well, speaking of plants, you incorporate some rather unique plants into your practice as well. You mentioned medicinal mushrooms and others. Would you speak a bit about that?
Yeah. So several years ago, the plant started reaching out to me. And so one of the first plants that reached out to me was pine, actually. And so I started journeying with plants in a spirit journey sense, which means to me, all of these words have so many different meanings, but to me, what I mean is I wasn't actually consuming anything. I was just sitting with the plant, closing my eyes, and letting that plant take me somewhere. And that somewhere might be out there, or it might be in here, but somewhere other than where I was when I closed my eyes. And so I started having some of those experiences, and I didn't know what to call it. I hadn't read any books about plant spirit medicine or anything like that at the time. And so I started just sharing those practices with other people. And over time, I did start learning a little bit more about plant spirit medicine. And, in addition to maybe sitting with a pine tree, you could drink pine tea or maybe have a pine tincture and journey with a plant that way. And so I started doing that with groups that I was part of. I started going to more events like that, but also doing some training and apprenticing to facilitate some of those types of things. And so that's just kind of been sprinkled in over the last several years. And then usually it's always at the request of a plant, though. It's rarely me deciding this is what we're going to do. It's a plant that I'm remembering right now an instance with Rose where I was planning a women's circle and I was doing the overthinking thing, and I had chosen a plant with my mind that we were going to have an experience like this, and Rose just kept saying like, hello, what are you doing? Like, I'm supposed to be there. This is wrong. And finally I gave in because we can be headstrong sometimes and stubborn. So it took a minute, but finally was like, okay, this is loud and clear. I know what happens when I don't listen. So this is what we're going to do. And it was beautiful and perfect and whatever every single person needed, including me. So typically these don't happen on a scheduled basis. They happen spontaneously when the plants come through. When it comes to medicinal mushrooms, I guess medicinal mushrooms for me are in the way that some people may specialize in adaptogens or they may specialize in, different types of herbs. Medicinal mushrooms is, if we're going to talk about a clinical practice or the physical health of the body, medicinal mushrooms are the thing that I gravitate towards. And so I do have an understanding and knowledge of a lot of other herbs, but there's something about medicinal mushrooms, reishi and turkey tail and lion's mane, even shiitake, that that just seems to be where I fit, so to speak. And it happened the same way. They reached out to me. And that was one of the surprises of my career. I mean, if you had asked me even 6 years ago or told me that medicinal mushrooms were going to be a big part of my work, I would have been like, well, that's curious. That's not something I would have had on my radar at all. But the mushrooms showed up and started talking, and they were quite loud. And it was amazing when I started learning about medicinal mushrooms, because I consider myself a relatively quick learner, but I absolutely have to go through the process of taking the classes and doing the research and forming it all together in my mind. But with medicinal mushrooms, it wasn't that. When they started talking to me, it was as though there was an encyclopedia that just blew up in my brain. It's an unexplainable experience. And so I didn't feel like I had to remember, like the actions of lion's mane or any of those things. I didn't feel like I needed to remember anything. I just suddenly felt like I had access to it. So that is from a medicinal, especially physically medicinal standpoint. I work with medicinal mushrooms more than I work with most herbs in my practice.
What are some things that we might be surprised by that? I mean, there's more and more that we're learning these days about mushrooms, but I bet you know a few things that we might even be surprised by.
Well, one of the things that's surprising to me about mushrooms is how ancient they are. They're 17 million years old. And if you think about that from a spirit standpoint or an ancestral standpoint, I mean, I regard every living being as our ancestors. And those are some wise ancient ancestors, 17 million years old. So I feel like when I'm working with a plant or a mushroom, either one, even if I'm working with it for a physical purpose, so to speak, I try to have a spiritual relationship and an emotional relationship with that plant or mushroom as well. So even if I'm taking a tincture in the morning to help with some physical thing, I'm talking to that plant and I'm holding some gratitude, and I'm trying to get to know that plant more than maybe I knew before. And so with mushrooms, I feel like we tap into something that's just so ancient when we work with them. And, if you go to the store and you buy a lion's mane supplement and you throw it in your supplement box and you take it with all your others, you may not feel that. And there's nothing wrong with taking lion's mane as a supplement. But if you do shift that perspective and open up to the possibilities, then I feel like mushrooms have this way of like pulling you in pretty pretty fast. That's just been my experience and the experience of people that I've worked with. Reishi being one for sure, that is kind of like, oh, well, if you want to talk, I've got some things to tell you. Or if you want to see, I've got some things to show you, you know.
And it's interesting, we're not even talking about, quote, psychedelic or those types of mushrooms. These are standard edible mushrooms. Standard in big quotes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So fascinating. So it sounds like, I mean, if you were invited in to do a drumming session at a local business, I mean, are you finding that this type of work is well received in your area? Because my assumption, from what I understand, in that area of the country, there's more Christian influence, let's say, or religious influence. Are you finding receptivity more and more? Or is it still challenging?
I could go a lot of places with that question.
Yeah. Well, the scope of this is, right, to help people who are wanting to make their herbal passion a profession, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is something that, especially if they live in your area, they might be like, ooh, you know, I might encounter this. So how have you handled that?
Well, I think to sum up my experience of what's happened is, if you're willing to keep your work very straight and narrow, like medicinal plants, medicinal herbs, this is what they do. Here's how you use them. I don't like using the word use. I like partnering with them or working with them, but I'm going to go with use for this example. Then our community is very receptive. You know, it's viewed as basically a holistic approach, like a supplement would be. But as soon as I start to veer off into my relationship with the lemon balm tincture I'm taking every day, or the meditation journey with my reishi, I lose a lot of people. And losing a lot of people doesn't bother me as much as the judgment. Because I'm not for everybody, just like nobody is for everybody. And the work that I do is absolutely not for everybody. And so that's okay. That's fine. But there has been a lot of judgment, and especially as I've moved into doing my private practice work full time, there's been a lot of accusations. And the words that people choose to label what I'm doing are not offensive to me, but they're meant to be. So as an example, like witch, like I've been called a witch, or a variety of other words that could be synonymous with that. And like, to me, that's not offensive to call me that because of the way I define that word. But from the people that it's coming from, it's meant to be a judgment, and it's meant to be ridicule, and it's meant to be, that's not okay. She shouldn't be doing that. Like, that's evil. And so that's actually been a little surprising, but it shouldn't have been. Because when I was leading women's circles and retreats on a very small scale, I was in a very insulated space. It was just these people who had, through word of mouth, found out what I was doing. And like, we were this little cohesive community, and it was very safe. And when I launched my private practice and everything was public, and my office is in a very public space, it's in a very well-known area of town where there's other holistic practitioners, it was out in the open. And so it was subject to anybody and everybody's perspectives. And what I found, and I'll say this, just, maybe it's helpful for somebody that's getting started, is that a lot of people just have no idea what you're doing. But there's no way for them to become familiar with what you're doing before they make their decision about it. So I've had a lot of people say things either to me in an email, or, within the community that's gotten back to me, that if we could have just talked for 5 minutes, we probably could have came to an understanding of what was actually happening. But just one word, like the word ritual, I mean, just that word, it's just so loaded. It's just such a loaded word. And a ritual can be brushing your teeth in the morning, or making your coffee. I mean, a ritual doesn't mean anything specific, but to some people it does. And so I've had to become very sensitive about the language I use when my marketing material or event material is going to be out just everywhere. It's not that I am dishonest or inauthentic, but I'm very careful about the words that I choose, so that I can choose words that the highest number of people will understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
versus like niche words and language that at best confuse people, but sometimes offend people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great insight. As far as even emotionally, what might you suggest to new practitioners who are, working through that still?
I mean, I think everyone should have a therapist or a counselor. I think that having a safe space to just process your things and share and not necessarily rely on friends or family who might also be having their own things to process and can't hold space for you like you might need it held, is just invaluable. And so I would recommend that for everybody, though, not just a new practitioner. But I think beyond that, I would really say that having practices that allow you to return to yourself and your intuition are really important, because it has been very tempting at different times over the past 5 or 6 years to tuck some of this back in, so to speak. Like, maybe that's a little too controversial, or maybe that's a little too out there. Maybe that's a little too esoteric or mystical, or pick your word. But that's me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I tuck that in, I can't bring everything that I meant to bring if part of it is stuffed somewhere.
Yeah.
And the only way I'm able to stay true to that is to have spaces carved out where there's not the outside noise, so that I can remember, yes, this is the calling, this is the path, this is who I am, this is what feels right. And I am going to trust these forces that are, bigger and beyond me to help me navigate this, instead of shutting things down or, not offering a service that I feel very, called to offer, so to speak. Instead of doing that, I'm going to trust that I'm going to have that help to navigate the situation is going to show up. And so I think without those practices that really let you come back to yourself, that would be almost impossible if you're doing something that's kind of outside of the norm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting too, like you described how you grew up, in the woods, and you're kind of a whimsical upbringing, that you did gravitate towards, the so-called left brain thinking, right? It's just like more studies and linear thought and science, but then you're coming full circle again into the plants. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because so many times I have to set all of the training and education aside. It's like, I'm a strategic thinker, perhaps by conditioning. I don't know if it's naturally or not, but I'm very much a strategic thinker, and I can really cling to strategic thinking as like a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times I have to say, you have to get out of the way. Like, you have to get this strategy out of the way. Yeah, it happens a lot.
Yeah, I'm really similar. And I was listening to an interesting talk the other day by, his name is Ian McGilchrist. I might be adding an extra sentence in there, but I believe he was a clinical psychologist, and nowadays writes books in that realm. I was talking about how the left and right hemispheres are very complementary, and you really
Mm-hmm.
need both. And I'm massively summarizing what the fascinating discussion was about, but it is so interesting how they're meant to lean on each other.
Mm-hmm.
We need both, and that, we assume that our logical thinking is the one that's going to be right. But what part of the talk, what he was saying is that the right side, in more of the creative flow and intuition, oftentimes is, quote, the correct side helps you get to that, quote, correct answer. Whereas the linear logical thought, you think you're getting to the right answer, but that's what trips you up.
Mm-hmm.
It's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
I've found the sweet spot when I can get there is to let the intuitive part of me make the decision, or to deliver the decision.
Mm.
And then the strategic part of me is for execution.
Mm.
It's like, once I know what needs to be done, well, now's the time for the time management brain and the strategic thinking brain and the negotiator brain, but not until I have a really clear idea of exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, what it's supposed to feel like, maybe even what the purpose of it is. Sometimes I don't know the purpose, but sometimes I just know it's what I'm supposed to do. But yeah, if I can hold off until all that clarity is there and then let the strategy come in, that's the sweet spot.
That makes a lot of sense, and has really been through building the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism that I've really been able to learn that better through practice. And it's been really fascinating because Matt's a very creative thinker. And so, there have been a lot of times where I'm trying to bring together those ideas. But then especially as we've been building out a new site, there have been a lot of instances where I'm like, just doesn't feel like time, or I need a little bit more. I just need to sit with that information longer. And fortunately, the previous year's experience have helped to instill in me, like, yeah, it's okay to take another couple weeks, even though in the past I've been like, the time is ticking, we got to get this done. But really, it's really amazing what unfolds sometimes when you just allow that process to happen.
It's so true.
So another question that comes up we have a number of students who are attracted to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism programs because they're very thorough. And so people who just love the information, want a very thorough education. It attracts a lot of people who are already in the health arena, nurses, especially nurses. And a concern they have is, how can I make a career out of this? I don't want to forsake or give up my license. And so how do you blend these realms? Is it easier in your field to kind of blend these realms, or has it been a concern of yours about licensure and so forth?
Well, I'm fortunate in the fact that my board certification comes from a holistic board. And so it's not a traditional therapy license. And so there's a lot of room in the scope of the board that I'm certified through. And so I have friends who are licensed clinical therapists, and it would be a lot of the things I do would be challenging for them to integrate into their practice. With evidence-based requirements and just certain types of different things like that, it can definitely be challenging. So that was one of the reasons I decided to pursue my education in transpersonal psychology and counseling, because that is a much more expansive, especially if you want to look at the spiritual domain and spiritual wellness. There's an understanding that spiritual practices and spiritual wellness is not an evidence. Like, it's evidence-based doesn't necessarily go with that.
Right.
And there's a lot that can't be articulated, and it's such a personal journey. And that can be said for, clinical therapy as well. I'm not saying that a clinical therapy journey is not highly individualized, but there are certainly very specific guardrails and ethics that are handed to you. Like, they're not your ethics necessarily, they're ethics that you're required to abide by. And so it makes it a little harder to go into some of these more intimate, vulnerable experiences, like maybe leading a plant spirit ceremony journey with a client. Some sessions with clients, that is what I do. Our counseling session is a 2-hour plant spirit journey with reishi. Mm-hmm. And the intimacy of that and the carefully navigated boundaries of that would be hard to fit into a traditional counseling practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So maybe even looking into different types of certifications and might be an option that I wasn't aware of. So that might be helpful for people who are looking into this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sounds like that was a conscious choice along the way. You already saw things going into that direction.
It was one of the few strategic, like this. Yes. Yeah. I spent enough time in kind of your traditional mental health agencies that I just knew that's not where I was going to be able to bring my work. Like, I already felt the calling and the pull, and I just knew I was going to have to twist things a little too much, and I needed a little bit more flexibility than that. So I think if you take a path like transpersonal counseling, for instance, the way I have, you also have to be aware of your limitations, though. You know, I'm not saying that I'm a clinical psychotherapist, because I'm not. I'm a transpersonal counselor, and I have clinical training and I have clinical skills, and I have pretty extensive trauma training. And so all of that comes up in transpersonal counseling. We have to navigate nervous system, and we have to navigate trauma, and we have to navigate all sorts of things. So I have sought that out separately so that I can put all of it together and safely work with people. But there are still limitations that I have to honor, both ethically and just because it's not within my scope of practice. So I think being conscious of that is helpful when you're trying to figure out where you want to go, and you start looking at labels and titles and degree programs. It's like, it's definitely not a decision you probably want to make super fast.
Yes, and likewise, my next question is, what type of clients tend to seek you out? What difference are they looking for or gravitate towards that they find you, or they choose you as opposed to, a more typical clinical practitioner?
Well, I think that people who are interested in spiritual wellness or spiritual development it's a huge component. And I want to make the clarification between spirituality and religion. For some people, religion is part of their spirituality, but they're not synonymous. And so spirituality, I'm talking about that, that part of ourself that is beyond our ego, beyond our mind, beyond our identity, our persona, the conditioning that we've picked up along the way, that core self. And there's a lot of people and a lot of agendas, not from a conspiracy theory standpoint, but just reality, that are trying to tell us how to be. Like, these are the products to buy. This is the kind of house you should want. This is what success looks like. And those messages and the effort to succeed down those paths can take us really far away from that core essence and that spirit that's within us. And so a lot of times people find themselves there, and they maybe want to unpack a little bit of it and understand how they got there. But after that, they really want to dive into those deep mystical places within themselves and within the world. And that's where transpersonal psychology comes in. It's about kind of going after the unpacking, after the understanding. It's about, okay, how are we going to cultivate a more mystical, magical, meaningful life? And different people have different words. Like, magical might not be your word, mystical might not be your word. Maybe you like the word enchantment, maybe you like the word just deeper. But it's finding the depth in our life, and then also making sense out of and integrating those experiences. And so sometimes people will have had a really profound mystical experience, like perhaps they've been to an ayahuasca retreat, or they've been on a vision quest, and there's this experience that is called coming off the mountaintop, where you've got all this gold and all this awareness, and you have to go back to the same life you left, and the same people and the same job, and this precious thing that you've remembered or discovered about yourself or the world. What do you do with it, and how do you not lose it? And so integration work is a huge part of my practice, and helping people navigate coming off the mountain, whatever your mountain is. And sometimes a mountain is a book. Like, sometimes people read a spiritual book that just totally shakes their entire foundation, their whole belief system and value system, and they really don't know what to do with that. And the people around them don't really know what to do with that either. And so whether it's something like a book, or whether it's a vision quest or an ayahuasca journey, there's an art to integration. And so that's a big part of my work, is helping people integrate the wisdom or the insight or the experiences that they have in those spaces.
Do you have an opinion about people? I mean, one could argue that if you're going on a medicine quest or vision quest, that you are actively pursuing that experience, right? What may come to you. But one might argue as well, if you go take ayahuasca or something mind altering like that, that you're pushing the needle, pretty far. You're really, really pushing for that action. In your experience and or opinion, do you have thoughts on if maybe there's it's so hard to phrase this, right? Because I don't want to qualify it too much, but because getting to that mountaintop experience can be, yes, life, oh, wow, oh my gosh, amazing. But then, okay, maybe I'll process a little bit and say a little bit more, maybe what I think too in the process. So I think ultimately, if you are going for that ayahuasca experience, your spirit probably seeks what it needs to have happen. And I think you tend to draw towards you. Maybe it's even a relationship. Maybe you have, God forbid, an accident or something. I think when you really need a life-changing experience, you'll draw it to yourself in a way. And certain people are more okay with pushing that needle further than others. Some people like going on a nature walk. That sounds great. I'll see which trees talk to me. And some people are like, no, I'm going all in, you know? What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's highly personal, of course. And I think that maybe I wish I had a better word than purpose, but maybe what your purpose is matters. Like if you
or intention, maybe.
Yeah, that's a better word. Because certainly going on a medicine walk without any mind altering or conscious altering substances could be a profound experience. However, it could be that your nervous system is so dysregulated from a very anxious life that you don't have the capacity to calm it over the course of that day, and you can't hear any of those plants or trees talking to you. And so I think that there's that to be considered, but I also think that the plants and mushrooms, whether we're talking about, the plants in the ayahuasca brew, we're talking about psilocybin. So if we want to go kind of over into this realm for a minute, I think that those plants and mushrooms call to people just like the pine trees do, and just like the lemon balm does. And so I definitely think that there's a tourism blooming around ayahuasca and psilocybin retreats. And I think we have to be really conscious about that and what is happening with that. But if we want to just look at it from the transpersonal realm and kind of the conversation we're having, I think that there's legitimate callings from those ceremonial plants to people. And I've had a few people that have even become clients who've said, I actually don't know much about this plant, whatever it is, but it keeps showing up in dreams. And I feel this like unshakable need to, figure out what this is about, go on a journey, take a retreat, something. And like, I'm here because I want help navigating that. Like, it's scary. I don't even know a lot about this plant. Like, I'm hoping you can maybe even teach me about this plant. So it's always really interesting when that happens, because it's not, I have a friend who went on this retreat and they came back and told me all these things, and I think I should do that too. It's coming from this very different place. And so I think that whether it's psychedelic or psychoactive or neither, I think it's so individual with the plant or the mushroom that's reaching out to the person.
Yeah, we had a class quite a few years ago. It was on it was either shamanic herbalism or developing intuition class, one of the two. And we did a plant journeying experience with ginkgo. And it was interesting. Everybody had their own experience in the room. And there were several quite profound experiences. And by profound, I mean, I suppose it would be the difference in a way, like maybe you read the Cliff Notes version of a story, and then you read the full-on version and you watch the movie. You read all 7 books and you watch the movie, as opposed to someone just summarizing it. And I mean, there were experiences with a capital E, and it was ginkgo. Now, ginkgo is an ancient tree, and before I think a number of us knew that, we got to experience that as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes too with comparing like psychedelic and psychoactive plants and mushrooms with sometimes those experiences can be gentle with a psychoactive or a psychedelic, but sometimes we don't need a gentle experience. Like sometimes we need an earth-shattering, rip the rug out from under our life experience. And the mushrooms and plants know that. And so sometimes that experience is what we need. And so I sometimes think about it like if there's that old woman or old man in the woods, that classic folktale healer in the woods, and you make your journey through the woods to their hut or their cabin, and you show up and you want their help, you want their healing, and they might do something just magical that's like this amazing story that you go back to the village with, or they might have you carry firewood for 7 days and send you back home. There's medicine in both.
Right.
And so, I tell people that if they're going to be embarking on a psychedelic journey, because even psychedelic journeys can be that way, you can build up what you think is going to happen based on the podcast you've listened to or the movies you've seen, and you may have a very different experience than that may seem anticlimactic, but it just means the treasure's buried a little deeper, and it might take you a minute longer to excavate it. But sometimes what we need is some gentle reminders and some kind of peaceful connection with nature. And sometimes we need something a lot more drastic than that. And usually we may not know which of those we need, which is why the intuition and listening is really important. And if you're trying to plan to go to one of those retreats or have one of those experiences and a lot of obstacles keep showing up in your path, it's always nice to kind of take a minute and be like, okay, am I trying to force this experience, or is Mercury in retrograde? What is actually happening here, and do I need to listen to it? Because sometimes with an eclipse, because sometimes we're trying to make those things happen for ourselves, but sometimes I think personally, sometimes they're meant to happen for us, and we're going to be called into them one way or another.
I remember probably one of the first herb events I went to was a United Plant Savers. They were out here in Wisconsin, near us in Wisconsin, and Matt was talking at the event. And they had a really nice, people had brought food to share, and it was quite a warm day, and someone had made a beautiful tea. And I didn't really understand medicinal tea at that point. I just thought it was just, someone brought tea, And maybe about 20 minutes after drinking the tea, I was just like so relaxed, but like in a blissful state. I think that was like my first, like angels were singing, and it can just be something like that. I mean, there's so many ways. You prepare to be surprised. Well, don't prepare to be surprised.
Right.
just let it happen.
Yeah, just be curious. That's the best. Yeah.
So speaking of curious, what have you been curious about recently? Anything that's been piquing your interest?
That's an exciting question. Let me think about it. I've been curious about community lately. I have been talking with a lot of other people and just reflecting on the idea of community that I grew up with and the 2023 version of community and the community that we're craving versus the community that seems to be accessible. And something interesting has occurred to me, and I wonder if it would resonate with you or other people, and that is that for people who are maybe under a certain, like I'm almost 40, so I grew up in a time without TikTok and Instagram, and the first cell phone I was a teenager, and it was a flip phone, and it was prepaid, and didn't take pictures. And so I also grew up in a small town where I knew all my neighbors. And so the idea of community is a real tangible, that type of community, like old school community, is tangible to me. Like I've experienced walking next door and asking for something, or people just dropping into your house, dropping by to see you, and you being able to call somebody at whatever time and they're there, and not your best friend, but like a network of people, right? And community is a word that comes up so often in the herbal community.
Yep.
And it seems like we're really craving that level of intimacy with each other as humans. And the level of connection we have is unprecedented. I mean, you and I are connecting across all these state lines through this technology, but there's an intimacy that we can't quite get to virtually. And so I'm just curious what the future of even the herbal community is, with some of those experiences that I had as a child, and people who were older than me had definitely more of them than I did, not being the norm anymore. and just the definition of community changing and shifting. And so when one person says community and I say community, we might be meaning different things. And I find in my work a lot with the group events that I lead, sometimes people are looking for community, but sometimes people are looking for services and they're calling it community. Like they're looking for safe space, but they're not looking for a collaborative experience. They're looking for, like, they have work that they would like to have someone hold space for. And that can happen in community, but that's not all that community is. Like, community is this exchange and this interaction. And so yeah, I've been really curious about community lately, and that certainly was a jumbled up
I love
explanation
that.
of it. But
I was literally writing the other day. So as we're building our new site, there's a whole bunch of new things to write and revamp. And I was writing the welcome email and focused on community, that, while we're an online school, we do our best to help foster that community. Now, you can't replace being together. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that, but whatever you can do to help foster, that kind of it starts with interaction, right? You mentioned, I think very rightly, that we have a lot of communication, and sometimes even just too readily available, it seems like you even mentioned, go out on a nature walk and you want to communicate it to everybody rather than having it sit with you. And so even thinking about regularly, how do we foster a community like atmosphere that is online? And what does that mean exactly? Before COVID was different than after COVID. I mean, even I know of a number of herb shops that are shutting down, just other places that people might go, and like things have shifted in how people interact. And it is very interesting. There are a lot of threads to pull on in there.
Yeah, and we could have a whole hour and a half conversation on just community. But one of the things I'm noticing, as like through my work in my private practice, is that people are so exhausted, and community takes work. Like, true community takes work. True community takes you showing up and you doing all of these different things to contribute to the community, so that there's also things to receive from the community. And since COVID, especially, we're all just so exhausted. And so this idea of it's a much easier, it feels easier to pay for community than to build it. And unfortunately, I don't think, in my reflection recently, I don't think that's how you get community. Like, you can pay to go to an event, and maybe you'll meet people at that event and you can build community together. But you still have to do that work as an individual in that community. And I think that that's actually really hard right now, because I think most people have been through so much over the last few years, and the pressures of, just even kind of the way business works in our country, and the pressure to monetize. If it's interesting or it's fascinating, monetize it. Just that pressure. It just keeps people so rushed and in the go, that any energy that we would have had to invest in a true community, it might be used up already. And this is just me, this is me speaking off the cuff. I've not, I might listen to this later and be like, well, I wish I would have worded that a little different. But I mean, it's just, these are the thoughts that are going through my head, especially as the director of a women's herbal community. I mean, that's what we say. We're the Mid-South Women's Herbal Collective. We used to be a Mid-South Women's Herbal Conference, but now we're not just a conference, we're a community. And that creating and maintaining the community dimension of that, just like you're speaking with the Institute, is like a lot of work. It's a lot more work than running a business.
Yeah. In addition to,
right.
And do you wonder, I wonder if, this is just total hunch, so we're just riffing at this point. Both of us are riffing. Don't hold us to any of this.
Yeah.
If you're chiming in the comments, riff with us, not at us.
Right.
But I wonder if so many of us also still carry like a fear of like that judgment during the COVID era, especially, like, there's so much division and there's so much heightened emotion. I wonder if we're still just like still have that in our physiology, that it makes it hard to connect or reconnect.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I could see how that could definitely be true.
And then even something I've considered for myself is, especially in our culture, and I love our country and our culture, so I'm definitely not bashing it, but there are certain patterns, right?
Sure.
And I do think we are, as a culture, very go, 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 and add more to your plate and do this and do that and do this and do that. And it becomes part of the zeitgeist. And it's just like, oh, this is just what we do. And I've tried to catch myself in this because I think I got caught up. It's like you stumble and you're like, oh yeah, I stumbled over that. And I think that is also what keeps us from feeling like we have the time for community. And for myself, I even had to, because COVID for everybody was just chaos, right? And just draining. And I had to start, like, in so many areas of my life from square one, just like, okay, I can't do these 5 things. I'm going to try to focus on 1. And then once I got that down, I'll go to 2 and just totally scale back.
Yeah. I think about too, the way we define something that's worthy. Like, we really have to look at that with community too. And like, this is definitely a tangent, but sometimes sometimes when we're in community, we're not actually accomplishing something external. Like, I think about in childhood, like my close community that my family had, like sitting on the porch together for 3 hours. That was a completely acceptable use of community time. Like, we didn't have to be changing the world. We didn't have to be producing anything. Like maybe somebody was knitting or, doing some hobby while they were sitting on the porch with everybody. And I might be oversimplifying this by the sitting on the porch, but it's not an analogy. It's what really happened. I mean, people, people would just sit around together, or they would play together for the sake of play. I mean, we would get together and have softball games in the summer just for the sake of playing softball. There wasn't a league, there wasn't a winner, there wasn't a video, there wasn't a Facebook feed. You just got together and played softball, and then we all went home. And so I think that the opportunity, like those experiences, are harder to carve out because there's so much pressure to do the other types of things.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
To perform, to be doing, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Even as you mentioned, being on the porch, and you said being part of the community, you wouldn't have called that. You wouldn't have said, hey, come on over and let's do community building.
Right.
It would just be like, come on over, or wave at them as they're, walking by. And we've really, I am a few years older than you, so I'm fortunate to have enough of that little experience. Like my elementary school was one long brick building, K through 5, maybe 30 kids max in each one. So you knew your whole grade, you went through all the grades together. And then all of a sudden, bam, we went into a school with like 300 kids. And so it's like, I got, fortunately got that kind of hometown. I grew up in the country too, but it still kept that kind of hometown feeling, Yeah.
I think too, like we've experienced community in small bouts in other places, like being part of a social group that it's the same people that meet over and over. And maybe you don't have a lot of, because some social groups, there's a lot of people that come and go. So there may or may not end up being a core group of people. But I think a lot of people have had at least a short-term experience of that core group of people experience, whether it was a book club that lasted a year or it was a church community or something. And if everybody in that was experiencing community, everybody was contributing to it. Now, sometimes there's somebody facilitating it at a, and that person might not be getting the same community experience that everybody else is getting in the group. So that can be a hard nuance to flesh out. But if everybody's experiencing community, then everybody is, got their hands in the community. And I don't know, I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. And I know that so many of us either have it in small ways and want to preserve it, or we are craving it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the answer is not it's not in a global place or a super public place. I think the answers are like they're either in here or they're very close to home. They're, you know, in the neighborhood, people that you talk to a lot and see a lot. And we frequently go really far outside of ourselves now for answers. And I think the answers to genuine community are going to be a lot closer to home.
I think that's so true. And that was something I found myself coming back to, is just like working on that one thing at a time. It was also like, I know I can't spread myself to help all these people, proverbial people, but I have my in-laws next door. And so I can focus on visiting them more often. You know, I can make sure that I'm taking time away from my computer. I mean, sometimes it feels like I'm at my computer all the time, but I can specifically make time to spend with my husband, you know, and not just be like, oh, it's dinner time, you know. I mean, we have a very connected relationship, but it's making that time initially until it becomes the habit of, oh, I'm just going to go next door and you know, visit.
Yeah, it's kind of like the community in front of us. It's like taking a minute to look at like what potential community is right in front of us already, that we may not actually have to go very far for. I like that.
Well, I look forward to continue this conversation. I'd love to touch base in a couple months and see what else has come to your mind. And because we're constantly also, that's this thing we were talking about earlier about, you know, allowing things to develop, but at the same time, you know, we have all these activities, these classes that we work on. You know, we have a game night. So you talked about softball. We have a game night, but it's different when it's online. And so, and it's a different atmosphere. So we're working on bringing that sentiment, you know, that fun, that free spiritedness, which still being on camera is not natural for most people. So I think there's a barrier there that fortunately I think is what helps us turn back to getting together in person. You know, there's nothing that really replaces that. We're going to still try. We're going to still try to have community activities on the Institute and so forth. But maybe that's a great note to end on too. There's only a few spots left at this conference. I don't want to mess up the name because you have two conferences. It is the Wild Medicine Conference. So if community is calling to you and you want to reestablish that sounds like a great way to get that going again.
Yeah, and you know, I'll say, Tara, like with the game night that you're doing, I mean, it's such an important piece of community to remember that it's not always about work. It's like community gets together and plays together too. And so you're bringing that lighthearted balance into, you know, learning and the other piece, which can be play, but it's, you know, it's kind of work. And there's this side of it that's play and lighthearted and it's just about being together.
One of the great benefits though too is one of our wonderful team members is a former elementary school music teacher, and so is well integrated into play. So that helps a lot as well.
That's awesome.
She loves play. So we love playing with her too. Well, this has been truly delightful, and especially for a first meeting. Wow, I think we hit it off pretty good.
Thank you so much, Tara. This has been awesome.
Thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds good.
Bye-bye.